Hey, do you have any old NAS laying around with HDMI port? Something like Asus Store? Or maybe Qnap, older, either this model or something like 53A series, 51 Plus series, with that old Celeron. Because every time there is a new update coming out, it becomes heavier and heavier and demands more and more hardware power to run the OS. So it seems like it's becoming slower, and eventually you need an upgrade. So on this video, I'm going to show you how to install something called UNRAID, something that lives on small USB stick like that, which you can just plug into one of the USB ports at the back of your Qnap. For example, in this case, I'm going to make a video about Qnap, how to install UNRAID on the Qnap system. And why would you want to do that? As I said, if you have old hardware, you may want to run something less resource demanding like UNRAID. UNRAID needs only around 1 GB of RAM and maybe 1 core of CPU. You may install it also on something more powerful if you want to take advantage of virtual machines and things like that. But in general, this OS is so tiny that it leaves more resources available for other things like Plex and things like that. So I'm going to make a video how to step-by-step guide how to actually boot from this UNRAID system, how to set it up, how to actually mount a share, and how to install a Plex. So these few things I'm going to show you because this is a basic requirement for any NAS to be able to run it, to be able to store your files on it and use it for any sort of applications. So I'm going to zoom out now. I'm going to share my screen. So first step is going to be visiting a website, unraid.net, then installing it. On the Mac, obviously, you would either double click or drop it into applications folder and type in the password. So then you can choose what SSD or other storage device you want to convert into this UNRAID OS. It could be USB. I would recommend USB 3 USB stick. You could stick it at the back of the Qnap or other NAS you're using. Other option would be installing an M2 drive or an HDD or SSD. You can use any storage device, whatever spare slot you have on your Qnap, you can use that. Or simply just go for USB version, which is fine. So when you go and convert your USB or storage device into UNRAID, it may take a few minutes to complete. It's going to download it, it's going to convert it, and it's going to make that your storage device bootable. And now it's time to connect all the cables. So connect your LAN cable, connect your keyboard or even mouse, connect your USB stick you just prepared with UNRAID system on it, and connect your HDMI cable to your TV or your monitor. And the next step is going to be going into BIOS of your Qnap device. You'll need to press F2 or F8 while it's booting. This will allow you to get into BIOS where you see. Make sure you disable any other boot device and leave only UNRAID storage device bootable. So in this case, I would have either SanDisk USB stick, or you might have some other branded USB. So make sure that is a priority first on the top of the list of booting, and then you can reboot your NAS and it will start booting up the OS. It might take several minutes to go through this procedure. When it's done, you will see IP address underneath. If you don't see IP address there, that means you haven't connected your LAN cable. You'll need to connect the LAN cable and scan the network. That's one option to find your IP, or you might simply go to URL I will show you later. If you do not have an IP, you could install on your Mac, for example, terminal, a scanner for your network and scan the network and figure out what sort of IP has been issued for your NAS. So the command would be arp scan. There are other commands you can use with this little app installed in your terminal, but that's what you can use. Otherwise, just go tower.local, log in. It will automatically find your UNRAID system on your network, and you'll be able to log in. As this is your first time you're logging in, you will need to create your password. There's no usernames you can create, there's only root for admin. So you make sure you create a strong password. And that's it, you have installed your UNRAID. Now the following parts will be relating configuration and setting it all up. So the first thing you will need to do is start your trial if you haven't purchased a key already, or if you have, then you might log in. I haven't, so I'll click start trial. So it's going to install the key and allow me to start playing with RAID, and then you can decide if you want the full license or not. It will also offer you to install a plugin. This plugin will link this server to UNRAID cloud server, which means whenever you want to see the status of your server, you can log into their, something similar like Qnap Cloud ID or Quick Connect from Synology side. You log in into their admin panel with your username and password and see what's the status on your server. This is a very handy feature if you haven't enabled port forwarding and you want to keep your server local. That's very handy to do. So afterwards you can simply log in and enable this link between your server and UNRAID admin panel in a way. All you need to do is click on confirm, and this is gonna initiate this link between these two servers. So once it's done, you can start playing around UNRAID's admin panel. So you will see in the dashboard things like CPU usage or memory usage, what sort of shared folders you have, users, what sort of parity you have enabled, and things like general design even of your tower. But the first thing you need to do is go to section main and select the parity drive and select the drive where the data will be stored on. So in this case, if I have two drives, the parity drive will simply duplicate data from the main storage device, from the main storage drive. Now when you have selected your drives, you can actually start a RAID per se. So all you need to do is tick a box giving you permission to start the parity, because this is going to initiate all the parity checks, which may take a few hours. And then if you click start and click proceed, it's going to start all this parity build up procedure. In my case, it might take around 4, maybe 5 hours to complete. It depends on the size of your hard drives, depends on the CPU of your drive, of your NAS. It's all going to affect the speed of this build of the parity data. So you'll get some notifications, what's going on in the background. The parity synchronization is in action right now. And any other notifications will appear in the right top corner. So as you see in my case, it's 5 hours 37 minutes. It might be faster, it might take longer. This is just an estimate. But in the meantime, you can create some usernames, some extra users. Bear in mind that these users you create, these are not admin users for this admin panel. You're creating SMB users or other users that you can connect from outside this NAS. Now we're connecting directly into it, but you'll be creating your mapped folders and things like that. This is where this is used. Also, you can change your time. If it's not already correct, you can change your time zone. Make sure it's correct. You can also choose automatic updates once you have selected the time zone. So you don't need to come back and change it every time there's summertime or winter time. All it takes, click apply, and it's done. In settings, you can change disk settings as well, particularly what I would recommend looking at is what sort of file system you'll be using. But you get also smart settings and automatic shutdown and hibernation settings and things like that. Docker is something you will need to enable for apps. Majority apps are based on Docker. And identification, this is where you can change your server name, but make sure that parities are finished before, or the RAID is stopped before you change that. You can also change management keys. This is something for accessing SSH securely without a password. And you can use that also for other things like HTTPS, for example, and SSL, and you can install certificates here as well, or you can sign in or sign out of your server and things like that. Or you can even enable flash backup, because the OS is simply used on a single USB stick, and if it gets broken, you'll need to make a new USB stick. It doesn't mean that your data will be lost, because everything is linked in this parity checks drive, but it might be annoying to create another USB key and go through this process. So you might lose 10 minutes of your time. But if you go to LAN settings, you can choose which LAN ports are going to be used in which way. You can do link aggregation, load balancing. You can change all those modes. You can choose which particular LAN ports will be enabled or disabled. You can enable bridging if you want to. IP protocols, you can go for older IPv4 or IPv6. It's up to you. The same with DNS settings and creating your own VLANs to keep in a secure ecosystem. These are things you can change here, but otherwise we can just head on onto the next part. Something like UPS. If you have one at home, you can enable automatic shutdown of your NAS if the remaining battery juice has dropped to, let's say, 10% or 20%. Make sure that you have enough time to safely shut down your NAS. Some people might leave it for 2% before it initiates shutdown procedure. Don't do that. I would initiate shutdown procedure as quick as possible once the power has been lost. VMs, this is also an extra you get, not just Docker, you also can play with virtual machines on UNRAID, which can be handy. So before we go and link it with Mac or Windows, you'll need to enable some sort of SMB or NFS mapping mode. SMB obviously is the most well-known way of connecting to your NAS, and this is where we're going to focus as well ourselves. So you'll need to choose what work group you want to be on. Generally, you can just leave it as a work group. Do you want to have dot files visible or not? So also you can leave the defaults. Multi-channel, which is something new. Synology hasn't rolled this out yet properly yet. Qnap has, but UNRAID has this UNRAID already. That means multiple LAN ports can be used for data transfer simultaneously to increase the speeds. And you can change things like enhanced Mac OS, support for time machines, for example, or net bias for servers, or you can enable WSD as well if you want to. There's discovery service. This is all optional. These things are here for you if you need to configure them. Otherwise, you can leave everything default. There's really no need to change anything down here. Once you're done, you can just, if you have made any changes, click on done, and it's gonna save it. And then you can head to configuring other things. If you click settings and go to FTP server, you can connect to your NAS that way. Some people do you can enable syslog server, which can be stored on this NAS or remotely. This can be handy when you need to troubleshoot any sort of problems with your NAS. And if you want to create some tunnels, you can do that as well here. but otherwise you can go and check out, for example, confirmation settings. This is very a confirmation setting, which is just a safeguard in a way. But we can change display settings. If you connect it to bigger monitors, you can configure things like backgrounds, resolutions, and things like that. Nobody really wants to change that, just things. Notification settings, this we can pay attention. This is really a handy tool. You can set up email notifications. It's all built in UNRAID. So you can get notification on your Gmail if a server is down or any updates needed, any issues. On other services like Boxcar, even Discord, you can link it with that. On other services like Pushbullet and Pushover and Push Plus, all these things are really, really handy to have. Or even Telegram if you have one. So as you're using your chat software on your Mac or Windows anyway, one of these notifications can come through from your UNRAID server. That's very handy. Another thing you can do is schedule your parity checks. What time of the day it's gonna rebuild the parity. That's obviously very good. SSD trim, also very good feature. If you run SSD cache, for example, SSDs, then plugins, you can install them either manually or automatically. It's up to you. That's extra functionality. We earlier installed my server link between UNRAID cloud server and our local server. This is the place where you're going to see every plugin installed, and Dockers and VMs. In here, apps center, you can enable community-based apps. That's being installed as a plugin, but you need to accept the terms, and you need to tell them that you understand the rules, that they don't take any responsibility about the apps you can install on this community sort of platform. There'll be hundreds and hundreds of different apps for backing up and for all sorts of game servers and file servers, and way more apps than you could even find on Synology, Qnap, and Asus Store, and all of these platforms combined. This is because majority of them are based on Docker, which means you can use this app basically on any other NAS that has this Docker support. So then you can install your first app, for example, Tailscale if you want to. This is what we will need later on. So I've installed that already. You can go to dashboard in the meantime, change a few other things. For example, in my case, it's a slim model of DX series. Instead of having tower model, I might actually look for some icon which is more similar to something what I have. This is not something you need to do, but visually you might find it more appealing to have a changed icon. But otherwise, as we saw before, you can see the temperatures of your drives. You can see how much of CPU power is being used during this parity rebuild as it's happening in the background. You can see how much time is remaining before the parity checks will be completed. So now you can see it's already 17%. So it might not be actually those 5.5 hours we saw earlier. The other things, you can go into a particular hard drive setting, not settings, but more like kind of settings, but also a smart reports and things like that. You can choose what exactly you want to look at. You can see serials and things like that. You can run some tests, so see what's left on the drive, capabilities, current status. If you want to know how much juice is there in the drive, is it close to failing, you might want to see these reports. Otherwise, this is not something you're going to go into. Okay, this is several hours later when the parity is done, all the notifications are done. We'll be ready to start adding shares. But before that, we will go into settings and go into disk settings, where you can actually change a few things. And it could be, if you want these drives to auto start, do you want these drives to spin down after a certain delay if there is no activity, there's no IOPS going through the drive. So you can leave it as never, for example, to never spin down. There are things like Plex or other apps that will never let those drives to spin down anyway. So that could be an idea to create a separate drive for that. For some other things, you can do spin up groups and default file system. This is important. You can use a default, or you can go for BTRFs or even encrypted file system. It's all available to you. It's not very obvious like in Synology or Qnap, where you create encrypted volumes, but this is how you do in UNRAID. So BTRFS is available there for you if you need one, but I'll leave the default option. Okay, before we create those shares, we'll need to go to Main tab and format those drives. So if you, on the bottom of the page, you'll see the format tick box. Which you tick and say, okay, I'm happy to wipe all my data, and click format. So now all those drives you added, in my case there is only one is parity, is wiped. You can go to Shares tab and give your share a name. In my case I'll say video. Give it a comment if it helps you identify your shared folder. There are other things you can change, how the data will be written to disks. For example, high water will mean that data will be written across all drives to level out the similar level of data written, or you can just say fill up one drive at a time. Then you can say which drive you want to write to specifically, either all or something specific. This is all you can do here. The other things I can show you, the limits and the info basically on these things, if it helps you make up your mind how to actually configure this thing, but you can keep it very simple. For example, cache pools and other things like copy on write. All these, if you click this question mark symbol next to every single line of this configuration panel, you'll know what exactly you're configuring and what potential options are there. So here, for example, it explains what the high water is, or what is the fill up mode, and things like that. You can also choose what's the minimum free space need to be there, what's the split level, how do you split it, and the other thing would be included disks. You can actually say what you want to exclude or include, or you just go for default options, what I would recommend in this case, and then just click add share, and this is how you're going to create a new share. After that, you'll need to add some security settings. For example, do you want to export or make this share visible, make it time machine specific, and do you want the share to be publicly available or private? Private means only certain users do have access to this. These users we created earlier on, and now we're going to be able to link those users to these shares. But before we do that, we need to choose this as private, export set as yes, and again, if you want more clarification, you just click question mark next to, on basically every line, on every setting there is offered in the list. This is going to explain you what exactly each parameter means and how you can change these things. So click OK there. It's all done. So the last step will be linking the share with a user and what this user can do. Read only or read write. Earlier we created this username add. If you click save, we're going to link this username with this shared folder. And from that point on, we can also create other user like, for example, Robbie. So he could have certain access to this shared folder as well, not just me. So make sure the password is strong, and then we're going to simply link it to the shared folder we created before. So click add to create, done. Go back to shared folders, open the shared folder we created, which was video in our case. Go down to the bottom, you'll see a new username there. So we can give read-only access to Robbie and click OK. So now all these two users are linked to the share, and we are ready to start setting it up on a Mac or Windows. We can start mapping those folders. So you need to do is connect to the server. This is how we do it. You can leave tower.local. You need to type in the share name. We are using SMB protocol, which we enabled before earlier. Click connect, and then it's going to take a few seconds to find the server, and it will ask for username and password. So make sure you don't use root ever here. Root will never work. Only SMB created usernames will work here. That's a very handy tip. So this is it. We have mapped the folder. This is UNRAID HDD. Tower.local it's going to be called. So if we go inside, we'll see folders available there already. So in our case, it's going to be only video folder when it's connecting. When it's finished connecting, you'll see video, media. These are, one is public, one is private. So if we go video, we can create new folders here. So everything we create here on our Mac actually is being created on this UNRAID system, just like USB drive, and every other device connected to this UNRAID will be able to do these things. So yeah, we're gonna create 3 folders here just for testing purposes. They can be called, as we call them, home, recordings, TV. It means nothing. You can add anything you want. Then we're gonna copy some data onto this UNRAID server, just to show you that actually it works. So I'll choose few files that are smaller in size, so we don't need to spend too much time with copying data forwards and backwards. So let's say something like around 8 megabytes. Let's pick just a couple of files and copy them over. You'll see in a few seconds it's all copied through the 1 gigabit line. What we can do now, we can head to Windows and repeat the process. We can map the drive in Windows, just in case if you prefer that, or if you have a mixture of both machines. This time we're going to use IP address instead of textual version of URL to the server. For some reason Windows didn't like it, so let's use IP, and then type in the password, like the same password we created for SMB shares and we just used on the Mac. Click OK, and you'll be able to see everything we created using Mac on this UNRAID system. See those 2 files, they're available. We can play them, you can delete them, you can create something new. This is all just like USB drive, but over LAN. How cool is that? So we can head back to Mac system and see that every new file we created in Windows is available also there. Okay, it's time to connect through VPN, and it's called Tailscale. Tailscale is the VPN service which allows you to easily link your computer and your NAS remotely through private tunnel. And to set it up for Linux system as this UNRAID, you'll need single command called Tailscale app. So go back to your UNRAID system, connect it through HDMI on your monitor or TV, and type in sudo Tailscale app. This will generate a unique link you'll need to paste in your internet browser and execute. Make sure you have created a Tailscale account beforehand, because this command will link this NAS to your admin panel of Tailscale. So as you see, I have 3 devices now there computer, phone and NAS. So all these 3 devices or 2 devices in cases, you'll need to have Tailscale enabled and logged in, because only these devices have their private tunnel enabled between themselves. No one else can actually get into this private tunnel. So you'll see IP addresses, unique IP addresses for each of the devices, and I'll just show you that it's possible to connect remotely. I'll disconnect from my Wi-Fi where NAS is located, and I'll connect to 4G, 5G, which is completely private network, and I'll use this IP address to connect. And as you see, it finds it straight away in the VPN because these 2 devices are linked. So type in your root, password, and there you go. You just logged into your UNRAID remotely, safely through the tunnel. You can see all your shares. You can configure things if you want to, change things. You can disable port forwarding because you don't need that if you use Tailscale, unless you go into specific configurations, but normally you don't need that. So you'll see all the shared folders, on what size it takes. If you click the icon to go into the share, you can see what files are actually stored on the share, and this is still remotely through web browser. You can see all those files, so you don't actually need to link SMB share. You can access your files remotely this way. If you wanted to, you could download them, you could play them, but it's up to you. I click download. Let's see if I can actually open these files and they will play properly. So let's click play and see. As you can see, it's all working just fine. We were able to log in through VPN, download the file without any SMB, anything else, no apps involved, simple download file. So that's fairly straightforward. So you can see this IP is VPN IP, and you can, as you can see, it popped up a notification that my SMB share mapped folder has been disconnected, because obviously the IP has changed. The laptop is connecting through VPN. So what we can do, we can actually map this UNRAID server using VPN permanently. So it doesn't matter, you're accessing your UNRAID locally in your local network or remotely when you're away from home. If you set it up through VPN, you don't need to do this switch all the time unless you need greater speeds. Then you could actually create 2 SMB shares, one for local IP, one for VPN. So you'll need to change the IP to this VPN IP, and once you connect, you will be always directing all traffic through this VPN, which is also safe if you're setting this UNRAID system in your business environment where you don't trust other departments and your data. The VPN, that's safe and private. As you can see, all these files you see there, they are delivered there through VPN services, not anymore direct. So you can do things like deleting, adding, changing. It's all through the 4G in this case. So let's switch back to a local Wi-Fi and see if this would still work with VPN enabled. And as you can see, it's still there. Okay, the fun part, installing the Plex. Go to apps, Plex media server. We pinned it earlier, but you can click on install, and this is how you're going to install it. But before you install it, make sure that Docker is enabled, because Plex is Docker based app in this circumstances. So go to settings and look for Docker. When you found it, make sure it says yes, is enabled, and click done, and then we can head back to our Plex installation. So you can find, if it's pinned, go to your apps and pinned apps. Make sure that's an official version. In the corner says official. Click install. There are two things we need to pay attention on: where the transcoding folder is going to be located and where the movies folder is located. The rest is just a few extras. So choose the path for transcoding, choose the path for the movies, where you're going to place them, So in my case, it's going to be video folder. Once that is, or let's choose recordings, where I just recorded this particular video, some footage of that. Clicks OK and save that. The rest can stay default. It's going to take a few seconds to install, download, and set up all the Docker image. Once that is done, you can launch the graphical interface, actions, web user interface. You can also manually type app.plextv or just use the IP, default IP, and just sign into your Plex server. You might need to claim this server, but otherwise just configure it. If you want Plex Pass, you can have that. You can give a name to your Plex server, and then click next. The next step is going to be media library, where you're going to choose where the movies are actually living on. Similar like we did on Plex, we're going to do that. Similar like we did with a Docker image, we're going to do the same in the Plex. So add library, choose other videos or anything else. Add folder. So click next, browse folder. That's going to be located in data folder. Data is where our Docker has access to. And then just click next. So you can watch Plex original movies, or you can find our added other videos folder. It's already indexed. You can see those videos. If you want, we can check it if it works. Click play. Yes, everything is active. Everything is happening. Let's have a look if we can do some other tests with this setup. For example, Tailscale, remote access, and things like that. If you want to enable, disable transcoding, go to settings. You can make your CPU hurt if you want to maximize it. As I said earlier, UNRAID uses so little of CPU power, so there's more performance left for things like Plex transcoding and other things. So it's really nice to have Plex server on UNRAID based system. So you can see the external IP. You won't be able to connect through that, but we can connect through the Tailscale. So if we changed our network as well from local server, so we don't connect to Plex directly, but we will be connecting remotely through the 4G. So we'll change local IP to our VPN IP from Tailscale. So now we can access Plex remotely. And what's good about accessing through Tailscale is that we have Tailscale speeds unlimited. Because if you connect through plex.tv, Plex VPN server, you're limited to 1 megabit a second. So most of the time you'll need transcoding enabled, a really good CPU to transcode those files when you do that through the Plex VPN server, proxy server. But it still works. Like you can see, this is app.plextv. We are connecting through Plex server. We can still play those videos. These are 1080p videos, so there is no really need for transcoding. As you can see, it does transcoding in the background. The little orange background bar is building up, so CPU Celeron is doing its job very well. So this has been a video how to set up your UNRAID OS on Qnap or any other HDMI based NAS. In fact, how to install Tailscale and access your UNRAID remotely and securely, how to mount your SMB share so you can actually put files on the server, and finally how to install your Plex server and access that remotely and securely. If you have any questions, come to NAS Compares, fill the form. You may suggest us making new videos, or you have simply some sort of questions. We are here to help.